Hello, I'm Tom Bradby. Welcome to our very last Talking Politics of the year. Pretty much everything has changed since we started this podcast back in January. We have a new Prime Minister, we have a new Parliament, we even have a new leader in every single constituent nation. So here's a quick reminder of the year that was.
My working assumption is we'll have a general election in the second half of this year.
I've been saying bring it on for a very, very long time.
Lee Anderson is now flying the flag for Reform UK.
I want my country back.
For the very first time, a nationalist takes up the position of First Minister.
Repairing our relationship across the political divide can only be done with someone else at the helm.
My intention to stand down as leader of Welsh Labour.
To begin the process of stepping down as the leader of Welsh Labour.
Months after its first black leader, Wales now has its first female First Minister.
And we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I've changed my mind. I'll be launching my candidacy at midday tomorrow.
At least 5 Conservatives are being investigated by the Gambling Commission for placing bets on the timing of the general election.
No, not at all. I know you've been in Normandy.
Yeah, it all just ran over. It was incredible, but it just ran over everything.
The broadcaster's exit poll predicted Labour will form the next government.
Liz Truss, rejected by voters.
From the ashes of disaster grow the roses of success.
Nigel Paul Farage is duly elected as the Member of Parliament.
I will shortly be seeing His Majesty the King to offer my resignation as Prime Minister.
The work of change begins immediately.
The first woman ever to run the Exchequer in its 800-year history.
Any responsible Chancellor would need to make difficult decisions today. So in today's budget, I am announcing an increase in employers' national insurance contributions.
Kemi Badenoch is elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
It is the most enormous honour.
The ayes have it, unlock!
Today, Parliament voted in favour of a bill to legalise assisted dying.
I think, what we've seen today is the best of Parliament. We've seen a really robust debate, but we've seen a debate which was full of compassion and respect for people of different opinions.
So Robert and Anushka are here for a bonus episode today to offer some brief recollections and reflections on a whirlwind year, and also some predictions about what 2025 might have in store. Predictions are always a terrible idea, which is why we're going to do them today. OK, what will you most remember about this year in 10 years' time? Let me go first. I'll give you a chance to think. I'm going to remember, I remember election night because I think we all love election night, and I just always remember them because it's one heck of a night and it's a great privilege to do it and everything else. One of the things I'll remember is, it was a late afternoon here and we're in the 5 o'clock News at 10 meeting, and someone mentions to me that Paul Brand has done this interview with Rishi Sunak and we're allowed to use a clip of him talking about the tax row. I won't remember that in 10 years. And I'm like, right, so he left D-Day. I just want to ask a question. He left D-Day early to come back and do an interview with us. Yeah, I don't know. I think he might. Don't know. We don't know that he actually did that. But I just remember thinking, wow, that's going to blow up into just such an enormous thing. And it's funny how those moments, it's a bit like the first Partygate stuff when I saw the Allegra Stratton video and I thought, oh my Lord, that is just going to go. Everyone in the whole country will have seen that by the end of this week. I mean, the rest of it comes and goes, but I guess I remember those moments that really take your breath away on the day and you think, really? How about you both?
I mean, so much, but actually I was going to say maybe the thing we'll remember most in 10 years' time is the return of Donald Trump.
True.
I mean, that is going to feel like hugely consequential for the world. In 10 years' time, we'll be able to look back and see whether he's triggered a trade war with China, what the impact of that has been for all of us, whether he's really rounded up migrants and deported them. But as I'm a UK politics person, I should probably remember our election as well, which I do think it's obviously huge just because of the absolute result, because of the massive turnover. But I think it marks a moment in history where the volatility of the electorate has just reached a new level. And from now on, the way that British politics is going to work is just totally different to the past.
I mean, I'm going to agree with Anushka. I remember, almost as if it was yesterday, our all-night election
broadcast, it felt like history because it was history, and the most important characteristic of it was that it confirmed something that I've been concerned about for years, but there'd been some counter trends in recent elections, which is just the fragmentation of the political system here. And I felt that was the underlying trend, but for various reasons we didn't see it in 2017 and 2019. But I always thought they were anomalous and they were a reaction to Brexit. And so to see on that night the rise of reform, significant progress for the Greens, in vote share terms, it was a sort of stability for the Lib Dems, although they got huge numbers of seats because of the eccentricity of the first-past-the-post system that we have here. And then Labour, with, frankly, by historical standards, a very low share of the vote, but winning this landslide. You know, we still don't understand the long-term consequences of all of that, but it's absolutely, you know, the most important phenomenon in modern political modern British political history.
And depending what happens in our political system might really affect it. The impact of what reform does from this point on is potentially going to have ramifications for a long time, and how the right overall, the Conservatives and Reform, react to what happened.
And remember, it was an astonishing thing on the night itself, but it shows you, you know, in a sense, what we all know in our souls about the significance of these shifts. You know, of course, we spent much of the night talking about, you know, what Labour would do with this massive majority. But behind all of that, all night long, was, is Farage going to get into Parliament at long last? What will he do if he does? It was not really a second story. It felt huge.
I'll tell you one other thing I will remember from this year is 3 nights before election night and before our coverage, I went to a dinner in Jermyn Street in central London with our 3 sort of political guests, George Osborne, Ed Balls and Nicola Sturgeon, because they'd never really kind of spent any personal time together, and I thought I kind of ought to at least give them that before we suddenly do 8 hours of election night together. And it was so memorable for a number of reasons. First of all, like, everyone in the restaurant was rubbernecking this weird dinner going on and everyone agreed it was. I mustn't say what was said because it was confidential, and we agreed that at the start. And they all sort of cut loose. But it was. I just found it so fascinating, them all having an honest debate, like about the Scottish referendum, about I thought you were going to do that. No, we thought you were going to do this. Or what would you have done if you were me? It was just absolutely fascinating. But it did make me think one thing which I pondered a lot when I was coming back from the US election night, where the polarisation was just really depressing. I found myself really down about it when I got back. Like, it's just 2 different Americas, you know, with 2 different versions of the truth as they would see it. Very hard to establish reasonable truth in the middle in the same way that has been possible for most of our lifetimes. And I found myself reflecting on that night in the restaurant and thinking, we still have a relatively civilised political culture. People still kind of can get on with people who they don't disagree with politically. Politicians have got a degree of respect for each other. Is that fair, or do you think that's an erroneous reflection on both this year and where we are?
Well, the only thing I would sort of not exactly answer your question, but I think there's more similarities between the American election and our election than we sometimes think. Although what happened here was a centre-left party won, I don't think that was like the rise of a centre-left party. I don't think that reflected the return of, you know, centre-left politics necessarily. I think it probably reflected a massive, massive desire for change after a time in which people had been whacked in terms of their incomes and living standards. And I do think, although obviously Trump and Keir Starmer couldn't be further apart in a way, I do think that that was a big part of what was driving what was happening in America as well. That said, the answer to the question, if you like, is different in each of those occasions. And I think the challenge for Labour now is actually going to be that it's going to come up against a populist movement like what we've seen in the US. And it'll be interesting to see if the Conservatives are taken over like the Republicans were in the same way in this country. And that just changes, you know, what we are trying to achieve. I don't think we're as divided as the US, but I think there are signs that we have shifted in a similar direction.
I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see how Farage handles himself over the next year, because that will have an impact on this question about whether our politics becomes as nasty and divided as theirs does. I mean, it is interesting to me that Farage doesn't really have the kind of respect for our institutions that most MPs have. It's not because, you know, he said, you know, anything in particular that's explicitly anti-Parliament, but there's a sort of swagger, there's a sort of slight, oh, well, the normal rules don't apply to me thing that he has. We both went to the Spectator dinner, and it was quite interesting. He was given a sort of jokey award, and rather than sort of, you know, playing along with the joke, he actually just did a little bit for the cameras to do a little, and he sort of did, again, that I've won, you don't understand me, you know, I'm running rings around you. And I think to an extent he is running rings around both parties at the moment. And he plays, you know, one of the things that's very interesting is Kemi Badenoch, Keir Starmer, they do play the parliamentary game. He doesn't care about Parliament. He cares about, you know, the people beyond Parliament.
Well, he cares about it, but he feels like it's rejected him. And I feel like there's a certain, those institutions have rejected me and I'm going to show them.
Yeah, but of course that is true. But in terms of modern politics, his relentless focus on what voters think is, in a social media world, right? That is the more effective strategy. And he gets it, frankly, in a way that neither of the, you know, you might argue that Ed Davey slightly gets it with all his stumps, but certainly Starmer and Badenoch at the moment don't get it at all.
I mean, big event of the year. Both of you had books out. In fact, one of you had 2 books out, and one of you had 1 book out. So congratulations.
Where's yours?
Yeah,
where's yours?
It's coming very soon. Don't worry, I'll bore everyone with it. Anushka's was New Statesman Top 20, we've just learned, so that's very good. Perhaps there'll be more books in 20, whatever we are next year, 5.
Got to do the paperback.
Yeah, let's go in for some predictions. I mean, why don't we start with reform? Do you think Musk makes a donation and it's significant or not?
Well, it'll be very embarrassing if the donation is made before this podcast comes out. But, I mean, look, I think that what this whole saga shows is that we are in, I think, a new era of politics. As it happens, I've been banging on about this for 15 years. I've read a book 15 years ago called How We Fix This Mess. And one of its central themes was the accumulation of these astonishing sums of money by this new generation, particularly of digital magnate, digital plutocrat, post-90s winner-takes-all economy, was going to have this massive impact on our politics, because when you accumulate fortunes on the scale of, you know, a Musk or a Bezos, if you choose to deploy just a fraction of your funds in a political direction, funding think tanks, giving direct donations, your impact is outsized. And when you're Musk and you've got a social media platform, you then become powerful to an extent that, frankly, no elected politician, or, you know, apart from the president, as it were, you know, can really compete with you. So we just are in this incredibly challenging era, and whether or not he manages, or, you know, whether or not he gives money in scale, 50 million, 100 million, to reform isn't really the point. Once you've got a billionaire in the form of Nick Candy as your treasurer, which they now have, you can be pretty confident that you're going to be raising quite a lot of money and you'll be able to build a political infrastructure that will challenge the main parties. So, you know, reform looks, I'm not saying, you know, that they're definitely going to win the next election or, you know, even that they're going to make that much progress. But if I were running either Labour or Tory parties at the moment, I'd be pretty worried that they are going to professionalise quite fast.
Yeah, because they can spend that money on doing the kind of, I've talked about this before, but Farage looks to Paddy Ashdown in the 1990s, who did amazing kind of setting down Lib Dem clause in certain constituencies and work the system. He understands the system and he knows how to work it. It sounds like if Elon Musk is going to give a donation, cut this if it's wrong by the time it comes out, it will be lower than the £80 million that we were talking about at some point. But nonetheless, anything like that is going to help Farage. I actually forgot what was my most exciting moment of last year, which I just mentioned with a prediction in it. It was actually at 7 p.m. on election night. For the first time, myself and Ed Conway from Sky News were able to go within touching distance of the exit poll process. You two had to wait here while we found out exactly what was going on. And Colin,
we were second-class citizens on the night, weren't we?
You were second-class. And Colin Rallings told us everything what happened. And I just want to... What was sort of amazing, he said, you know, Labour's won a majority... it's going to win a landslide. It's going to be on a really probably quite low share of the vote. He said the Tories have just collapsed everywhere. And then I was like, well, what about the SNP? And our colleague Emma Hoskins said the word apocalyptic is being used about the SNP. And at that point, I almost wondered if they'd even get to the 10 seats that they finally predicted, which I think was one out, wasn't it? And I knew you had Nicola Sturgeon in the studio, and I was coming back here, and I was like almost quite shaky, worrying about, will Nicola Sturgeon storm out of the studio when she's revealed the figures at 9:30?
I think
she knew that. It was really interesting.
And not stay for now.
I think we have to paint a picture of this, because I genuinely think it's one of the most amazing things about our job, and it's hard to capture the excitement of it. You know, so much energy goes into an election. Of course, exit polls can be wrong, we know that, but they just have been largely right for quite a long time. And so Colin, our guru, and his team are like buried underground. We do it jointly with Sky and the BBC, so they're all buried underground. And then you get the first insight then. And then they come back here, and I can't remember when, you know, it's... What is it by then?
Something happens on the route.
9:30.
I told you about what happened on the route as well.
Right, okay.
So it's me, Lily and Colin in the car. We accidentally took the wrong taxi. Lily's my producer. So Emma Hoskins couldn't get a taxi back. But anyway, and Colin suddenly leans into his bag and he says, I'm really sorry about this. I'm really sorry about this. But, you know, don't tell anyone, although he knows that I'm now telling you. It's fine.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to happen. And he pulls out a little bottle of vodka. And he takes 2 massive swigs of the vodka. And he says once before every election programme he needs vodka to get through it.
And, you know, he's the calmest guy, isn't he? He's the calmest guy you've ever met on air and off air.
I don't know what there was about that process, but I was physically shaking when I came back, and then I knew you were going to find out about it.
It's such a big night. And I remember the very first time I did election night in 2015, and I'd done the political discussion show, I did the agenda for a while, but I'd presented one news bulletin in my life. I that day signed a contract to start doing news at 10, and this was my first election night. And I walked in here, and I never get, for whatever peculiar reason in my psychology, probably doesn't speak very well to me, but I've just never got nervous doing live TV. But and I didn't really get nervous, but I came in the door, and the whole of the atrium here, which for those who can't visualise it, is pretty massive, was full of people, and you realise there are hundreds and hundreds of people working on this night, and the whole nation is waiting to hear who has won this damn thing. And I thought, bloomin' hell. And then you get to that point at 9:25 when Colin comes back with this unbelievable piece of intel, which is basically the result, and no one else knows across the whole country, and it is so exciting. And in 2015, it was a surprise. 2017, obviously, Theresa May. I remember the meeting in 2017. You know, he said, right, Theresa May's lost a majority. And we were like, oh, my God. We had never once rehearsed Labour gains. You know, we just didn't. I said to the head of graphics at the time, I said, do we even have a Labour gains battle board? He said, oh, I don't know. I'll have to go and see if we can dig it out from the last election. Anyway, it's hard to overstate the excitement. And then you've just got a very short amount of time before you go on air at 10 to 10. And then obviously you announce the exit poll at 10. and you're trying to plan out 8 hours of programming based on the election program, and you feel like your mind's going to explode because you're trying to think of millions. It's supremely exciting. And now we should explain. Obviously, we get Colin to come down to the studio. Everyone has to hand over their phones for security. And so we have Nicola Sturgeon and George Osborne and Ed Balls, and we're all, and Robert and Anushka and I, and we're all sitting around, and Colin does his thing, and then there's...
And Jane Green does her thing.
And Jane Green does her thing. Colin gives the numbers, Jane explains what she thinks going on, and then it's just like, bloody hell. Pin drop moment.
And Nicola did not walk out.
Yeah, Nicola did not walk out.
No, she didn't. Well, I think she was ahead of us, though, because she knew it was going to be a terrible night for them. It was really quite interesting. You're absolutely right. I did the 217 result is the one that I remember feeling the sort of wow thing more than any other in recent history. We sort of knew that Johnson was going to win. The size of the majority was a bit bigger than many of us, than the polls were saying, and that might, but I knew he was going to win, and we knew he was going to have a decent majority in 19. We knew Labour was going to have a decent majority, but that 2017, I remember going into the then. Because in those, so now we have the briefing in the studio with, as you say, fans. But back then, the briefing was in the editor's office, and I do remember when they were going through the result, just thinking, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" And but it is but the thing is, it's great if you love our kind of journalism, pressure journalism. It's a great night because as soon as you've got the result, all these different thoughts come tumbling in. It's going to mean this in terms of the way they're going to govern, and this in terms of the future of various leaders. And the thing which is always amazing to me is you think ahead of time, you're on air from 10 o'clock at night till 6 in the morning, and that 8 hours non-stop feels, in theory is a long time, but it just goes in a blink. It's incredible how fast it goes.
2017 was the first time we had Balls and Osborne as guests, and the reason that I'd really wanted that is in 2015, I'd sort of doubled down on what I'd thought when I did it as political editor in 2010, when I was, obviously not presenter, which is that the first 3 hours are full of politicians saying, well, I'll stop you there. Let's just wait and see if the exit polls are... And you just hear the same thing all the time. And I thought we need people who people know and are actually going to cut loose and say some stuff. And then when Colin told us the result, we went down, I thought, surely George Osborne is going to have to hedge here. He's not going to really go for Theresa May. And so I announced the exit poll, and I turned to George Osborne, and he just launches himself like an exocet. Obviously, he felt pretty bitter about it. Anyway, that's ancient history, but it was very good.
So we should get back to your original question, which is about forecasts. Actually, there's one other thing, though, just in terms of big moments. I should just repeat, because I do think... this is hugely significant, is I suppose the other thing that for me was a succession of events for the year before the election, as it were, which is just the refusal of Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves to accept they were inheriting a black hole. And, I said it to them repeatedly. We all talked about it on the news repeatedly. They would not accept it. And I do think one of the reasons they are in trouble and they've lost trust is because they didn't prepare the ground for what needed to be done. And, this was willful denial on their part because they did not want to talk about tax rises before the election. It was a massive mistake because the data was there that showed them that they were going to have put taxes up, and they would be much more trusted now if they built the case. Which brings me on to something which is not so much a prediction, but I'd like to know what Anushka thinks about this. I am literally staggered by the number of very senior Labour people, including members of the Shadow Cabinet, who talk openly... Sorry, the Cabinet, sorry. Including members...
Remember they won?
Yeah, sorry. Very senior, sorry. I'm staggered by the number of very senior Labour members, including members of the Cabinet, who talk openly about the real possibility, they say, of Starmer not leading them into the next election.
Wow.
It's a massive talking point.
That is interesting.
It's a massive talking point. There are a lot of individuals at the highest level who have lost confidence in him. Now, I'm not saying I slightly think this is sort of early Parliament jitters. The thing about politicians is, you know, they love to catastrophise, all of that stuff, right? But for this to be a subject of conversation at the top of the Labour Party so few months after they've won a landslide is, for me, astonishing. But it's a fact.
I was speaking to a very senior colleague at another broadcast organisation and remembering 97, which on the face of it looks just as bad in a way. He had the Bernie Ecclestone scandal for Tony Blair, and then he actually took benefits off lone parents, which I think rings bells with winter fuel payments, resulted in a massive rebellion, it resulted in ministers being sacked. And they said nothing has ever felt as bad for a new government as this period right now.
No,
clearly.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. I was absolutely immersed in the 97 election. I was political editor of the FT at the time. And yeah, things went wrong. The notion that anybody would be talking about replacing Tony Blair at that stage was absurd.
But can I just but
nobody talked about. But I mean, look.
So I'm just going to. I'm not. I don't actually. You know, you said I disagree with you guys on the majority point. I don't. It's not that. It's just that I just want to explain what they think.
Yeah.
Right? Which is what the Labour Party thought was that they couldn't make those promises before the last election if they were going to have the majority that they ended up having. They believe, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. They believe that having a massive majority gives them political stability. The reason why I think those people who are musing on whether Keir Starmer will be there or not are probably wrong is that I think actually the people who work for Keir Starmer did a pretty good job at controlling the selection of MPs, which means that obviously when you've got over 400 MPs, there are going to be dissent, but most of those people are fairly loyal to the leadership, however annoyed they might be about individual things. But the big thing they think is they think they've got all the bad news out of the way, they hope, right now, that they don't plan to come back with tax-raising budgets, and that they think that over the next 4 years they can stabilise things. And what they know is a fact, and we all know it's a fact, if they have to improve things in the NHS, they have to improve delivery of things, and if they don't, they're in massive trouble. They believe that by 2029, it's going to feel completely different to now.
Okay.
That said, I think it has been an unbelievably bumpy start.
Okay, sorry, but the other thing, just to I don't know how much more we want to go on to this. It is very, very hard to make forecasts about anything because ahead of Trump actually being in the White House, until we know whether he delivers on tariffs, eviction of undocumented migrants, unfunded tax cuts and the rest, you know, very difficult to make forecasts even for the UK because we are going to be so exposed to the shockwaves. And I'll give you one example. I was talking to a very senior Labour MP about this, right? Let's just say he does something which seems highly plausible he will do, even if he doesn't do across-the-board tariffs. The idea that he's going to put up, you know, Elon Musk is in the White House with him. The idea that he's not going to put up tariffs massively on Chinese electric vehicles seems to me to be for the, you know, of course he's going to put up tariffs on Chinese EVs, right? At that point, what would China do? Rational thing for them to do is dump electric vehicles on Europe, including the UK, okay? What does the UK then do? If the China dumps EVs on the UK, our car industry is destroyed, right? So it's just one possible ramification of something that we cannot make sort of any kind of rational forecast at the moment because, Trump's not there and we don't precisely know what he's going to do.
We should probably wind it up here. I was just going to say that, in fact, it's probably not fair to make comparisons with 97 anyway, because one of the other points we all keep agreeing on is how skittish politics is. And, politics is just very different to how it was in 97. So arguably, we may never see that kind of stability of support. Again, I did as you were talking, I did think, as I came towards the end of my time as political editor, and I'd been doing the job for a decade, I realised the conversation I'd had most is, walking along, approach MP from the government side, say to MP, "Oh, how are you? Fine. How do you think things are going?" Pause. "Well, they're just not listening," by which, obviously, they meant they're just not listening to me. And I just thought that just kind of summed up politics. Anyway, let's leave it there. I will make one prediction. We will have multiple references to the multi-billion-pound black hole next year, at which point Robert and Anushka and I will probably all be smashing our heads against this desk. But that is all we have time for today, and indeed for this year. We will be back in January. Until then, from all of us, thanks for listening, and have a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.